Good morning. Looks like everybody's getting in. Hi, Wayne.
Hi, Cher. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Just fine. Are we having a release of initial claims each of the next 2 weeks or calls since they fall on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve?
I will kick it to Ryan for a response to that.
Well, Wayne, I'm not sure we might have a press release next week. Sharon and I will have to chat about that. I don't anticipate a call though, since
Okay.
Friday is. I'm not going to work Christmas, Wayne. I'm sorry. But in terms of the following, I would anticipate at least press releases the following weeks. But in terms of press calls, just how those holidays fall, I'm not sure if we'll have a press call, but we'll definitely keep you all posted.
Okay. Make sure they send something to our city desk so that they know I'm off. So
Will do.
as I might use it or lose it vacation.
You deserve it.
Thank you.
All right, guys, we'll go ahead and get started. It's the Department of Labor and Employment's monthly employment situation press call. I'm Cher Hovand, Deputy Executive Director and Chief Communications Officer. And we have Ryan Gedney, Senior Economist with the Department of Labor. So we have a few things to update you all on today. Obviously, Ryan's update on the November employment situation. I'm assuming Ryan will speak to what's not in the data and what we expect to be in the data for December and January. Certainly a lot of recent activity with particularly restaurant and industry activity will probably most likely be more accurate and reflected in the coming months releases, but I'll let Ryan speak to that. So today my updates, a couple of quick things, an update on where we are with folks who are potentially going to be losing benefits because of the upcoming expiration of the CARES Act on December 26th. Just very high level, what we understand to be included in the stimulus bill with regard to unemployment and actually trust fund. And then we'll talk a little bit about our our years-long attempts to modernize our unemployment insurance system and how we're closing in on a go-live date for that upgrade. And then kick it over to Ryan for his update on November employment situation. So this week we were able to pull some data in terms of those claimants who perhaps are not active filers for unemployment, either regular unemployment or PUA, pandemic unemployment assistance, but rather those who have benefits remaining on their claim or are actively filing for unemployment. And it's about 280,000. Again, just a clarification on some data we provided earlier in the week. Those aren't necessarily folks that are currently receiving a UI payment, but rather folks who have a benefit amount remaining on their claim. So of those, about 191,000 are within the PUA program. Again, not active filers necessarily. So collectively about 280,000 claimants in Colorado who will experience expiration of benefits next week. Let me just go back and clarify what I said. PUA does include PEUC. So it's the PUA claims, the PEUC claims, which provide an additional 13 weeks, again, up for expiration when the Federal CARES Act expires next week. With regard to what we have done for these claimants, we've posted web alerts on our website. We'll be preparing to email them today into next week. But certainly all eyes are on the stimulus package. There are a couple of extensions to these benefits in the proposal that's before Congress right now. One is extending the PUA program to 55 weeks, expiring in April 19th. Another provision extends the PEUC program to 16 weeks. Another provision adds a $300 a week FPUC benefit. This is federal pandemic unemployment compensation, Previously, it was $600 a week. The new proposal has $300 a week. And let me just circle back to PEUC. It's actually 13 weeks under CARES Act and would be 29 weeks under the current package. It also extends the zero interest borrowing that's provided under the CARES Act for our state's unemployment insurance trust fund. And all of these provisions are through April 19th. It does look like the backdating, there won't be backdating. It really varies on when the bill is passed and when it's signed, but all of these benefits would be effective as of December 26th. There was some conversation about backdating to December 1st, but it's actually December 26th would be the effective date. I'm going to pause and see, Phil or Ryan, to your knowledge, did I miss anything in the upcoming stimulus bill? I think I was a little fuzzy on who's impacted by the upcoming expiration, but just to be clear, those are gig workers, self-employed and independent contractors who would be losing benefits on the 26th, and also those who benefited from the PEUC extension. That's 13 weeks on top of your regular unemployment if you're a regular claimant within the Federal CARES Act.
Yeah, sure.
How soon could you get that flying if this is approved pretty soon?
And that kind of does lead me into my second kind of topic about timing for implementation. But Ryan, go ahead. Were you going to add something?
Just to add on what you were talking about with the expiration of PEUC and PUA, if this is not extended, is that of that 280,000, Cher mentioned about 191,000 were PUA claimants who have weeks remaining on their claims, and then about 89,000 claimants for PEUC who also have weeks remaining. Doesn't necessarily mean they're currently active, but it means those groups of individuals would be impacted if we did not see an extension to the current benefit system.
I think that addresses Charles' question. That's right. So those who maybe currently are on the PEUC who had not run through their 13 weeks would be impacted. Again, PEUC being extended potentially through April 19th to 29 weeks from 13 in the current stimulus package. So with regard to timing, we hear that there may be some activity next week before the Christmas holiday, at which point it goes on to the president for signature. So what we're hearing just from our national workforce advocacy groups are that it likely wouldn't be on to U.S. Department of Labor for guidance until early January. And as you all know, as we've reported under the CARES Act, our departments, all state labor departments actually cannot begin any programming of our systems to administer these new benefits until we receive official U.S. Department of Labor guidance, eligibility requirements, documentation requirements, and what we need to reprogram our systems to administer the new benefits. So we're looking at, from the time we get guidance from the feds, anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks. But all of this is likely going to happen at the same time we are modernizing our unemployment benefit system, which leads me to my second topic. We have been operating Colorado, as many other states, on old technology and old systems to administer benefits and manage our employer premiums for years, actually. And so these systems are developed and managed with old language and old code, and an extension like we've seen with the CARES Act, what we saw during the Great Recession. Any extension of benefits means that the reprogramming doesn't happen quickly with agility, and makes adding, especially during a recession, any additional weeks outside of a state's regular UI program rather cumbersome and complicated. We were actually poised to go live with this new system in April. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and we had to shift resources away from this effort to quickly stand up, as you know, several new federally required programs under the CARES Act. So after getting through the bulk of those initial claims and standing up the PUA system, our vendor returned to work on modernizing our outdated system, and now we are just shy of about a month away from go live in that new system. So what does this mean to claimants? What it means to claimants is there will be a period of time in early January where we have dark days. And this means that claimants will not be able to interact with the system, request payments, or file a claim. We will be reporting out likely in the next few weeks before we go live to you all other resources and opportunities for claimants to get information. And we don't have those details to share today. The dark days will not be on a payment request date, which is on a Sunday. It's likely that it will be a Wednesday through a Saturday. And all systems that are going through modernization, like we are in other states, have the dark days because you're actually lifting and migrating the data into a new system. We will actually be bringing over just over 600,000 claims from the old system to the new system. And again, that requires a down period with the system where claimants are not able to file a claim or request benefits. However, when we do bring the system back up on a Sunday, which is a payment request day, we will have additional staff ready at the call center. We will have extended call center hours from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And again, we look forward to sharing additional information on what the impact to claimants will be and what services and resources we're prepared to stand up to meet the need for information. With that, Phil, my resident expert from UI, anything I missed on our modernization efforts?
I think you hit it pretty well. I think a couple of things to focus on pluses for claimants when we go into that new system will be a couple of things. As Congress rolls out these new programs and as we get guidance from US Dole, it'll make it much quicker to stand up those portions on those programs. So in the old system, it would take anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. So hopefully it takes far less time on that. Also, claimants will go from filing to get payment once every other week to every week. So they'll be able to more consistently file to receive payments once that goes up. So overall, it'll be a plus. Claimants will be able to handle some of the issues on their own, and we believe it'll be more user-friendly for claimants. They will be looking at much the same stuff that our staff looks at.
Thanks, Phil. And just to kind of circle back just quickly to when we were required to pivot our resources earlier this year when COVID hit. Fortunately, our modernization efforts were far enough along that that's actually the system for PUA claims that will now become the system for all regular unemployment benefits and PUA benefits. So had we not been as far along in our modernization efforts, it likely would have taken us longer to stand up a separate system, begin taking PUA claims and paying PUA benefits. And so the user experience on the claimant side that is within the PUA system in terms of the interface with the application is what will be on the regular UI claimant side as well. So I am going to pause there, and I'm sure you all have questions, but we'll go ahead and turn it over to Ryan.
Thanks, Cher. I'll dive into some UI data first, then pause before I get into the deployment situation. So y'all can gather your questions regarding what Cher talked about and what I talked about for the most recent UI data. As always, let's start off with the most recent data. That's the initial claims data for the week ending December 12th. The department processed 19,854 regular UI initial claims for the week of the 12th. Interestingly, nearly 80% of those initial claims were new, while the week prior, less than 65% of regular initial claims were new. And that's opposed to reopen claims. And we've talked about that in prior calls. That shift could be driven by a spike in construction claims that typically happen around this time of year, but we won't be able to confirm that until we're able to analyze industry-level claims later this month. While the rate of increase in regular UI initial claims has slowed, this is the first time since early May that the state has experienced consecutive weeks with more than 19,000 regular claims filed. Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, or PUA, initial claims for the week ending the 12th totaled 20,621. I'll repeat what I said last week, but there are a couple reasons that could explain this recent uptick in PUA claims. First, the increase in PUA initial claims over the past several weeks is somewhat comparable to the increase in regular UI over the same period of time. So it is possible that further business capacity restrictions would impact PUA claimants as well as regular UI claimants. Again, we've talked about that where 15 primarily urban counties shifted to the red COVID dial on November 20th, which coincides with the spike in claims we've seen since that point. A second, claimants that have exhausted benefits in other programs. This is primarily going to be state extended benefits or SEB, which triggered off at the end of November, could be eligible for PUA benefits, and that's provided that their joblessness is due to an impact from COVID. I think the most recent number I saw is that we had something around 5,500 to 6,000 SEB claimants that had moved over to the PUA system. Continued claims, which tend to lag initial claims trends, are continuing to increase further. Regular UI continued claims for the week ending December 5th exceeded 97,000, and that's compared to 79,000 for the week ending November 21st. That's the highest level of regular continued claims since mid-October. Combined with activity from PUA, which registered 83,600 continued claims for the same week, and pandemic emergency unemployment compensation, a little under 75,000 continued claims. The total continued claims surpassed 255,000 for the first time since early August. So again, with overall claims, we are seeing a significant uptick both in initial claims and continued claims. Approximately 95 million was paid out in total weekly benefit payments last week. Regular UI accounted for 37 million of that total, while PUA contributed an additional 32 million. And over 21 million was paid out to PEUC claimants. Looking further into benefit payments, approximately 412 million in regular UI benefits have been distributed by the department over the past 11 weeks. In comparison, that amount exceeds the annual amount of UI benefits paid out last year. So while we still have seen a decrease in those weekly UI benefit payments, if you recall in May, April, we were paying approximately 80 to 90 million a week. Again, benefit levels are still extremely high and payment levels are still extremely high. As a reminder, regular UI benefit payments this year will be greater than $2.5 billion. And finally, an update on the borrowing status of the UI Trust Fund, which is used to pay out regular UI benefits. About 671 million has been borrowed from the Federal Unemployment Account, or FUA, since the fund became insolvent in August. 19 other states and the Virgin Islands are also borrowing from FUA. And again, that is unchanged from what I've reported over the last 6 weeks or so. Combined borrowing in the US has exceeded $44 billion. And with that, I'll see if, Sheriff, we have any questions. Doesn't look like we have any questions. Any questions for the UI data before I jump into the establishment survey?
I don't have a question about the data, but I just want to make sure that I understand kind of, I'm characterizing this right. So even though people have a hard cutoff of benefits on the 26th, and let's say another stimulus happens, folks are still looking at mid-January before they start to receive any benefits again.
That's correct, Haley. Actually, likely not mid-January, likely later January or into February, in fact. Historically, what has happened is after the bill is signed, then the bill is sent to the U.S. Department of Labor for guidance. And again, this is technical guidance, which determines how we reprogram our systems. As an example, during the Great Recession, sometimes it took up to 10 weeks to reprogram our systems because of the old technology. One thing we hope to accomplish with our modernization is a shorter window for reprogramming versus where we were early pandemic and during recessions. So we'll continue to keep claimants involved on what that reprogramming window looks like, and when we plan to start paying benefits. Phil, do you happen to know how much we got in CARES Act? Noel, are you referring to administrative funding or how much we were able to pay out in benefits because of the CARES Act?
How much you were able to pay out to workers?
I think that's in our Thursday release. Ryan, do you have an updated number?
No, it's just going to be those annual numbers that we provide on the press release. So that will be payments for PUA, the total number for PUA, for FPUC. LWA will not be part of that since that was separate of CARES. Phil, am I missing anything there in terms of?
Yeah, you would have your PEUC, and then there's some funding that was provided to us right for SEB because they cover part of those SEB costs when we had SEB. So FPUC, PUA, PEUC, and potentially some of those for SEB. Ryan.
So let me just break it out. So for PUC, again, this is through the week ending November 12th. That's 284 million. PUA, we're reporting 923 million have been paid out. And FPUC, that's going to be again, that's $600 a week. That's the bulk here is 2.5 billion. Have been paid out. I'm gonna leave the SEB portion alone but that is 100% federally funded, at least through through the expiration of SEB for Colorado. We have paid out about 29 million in SEB so far this year. But if you combine PUC, PUA, and FPUC, well, you should have just listened to Joe. $3.7 billion. So good job, Joe.
I'm constantly impressed by Joe's math skills. I think he's way better at math than I am, actually. So thanks.
That was a good check, Joe. I appreciate it. So
he's showing off.
Joe rounded down a little bit, but no. All right. So Cheryl, I'll kick it over to you. I think this might be.
Sure. Okay, sure. So Blair, again, at the top of the call, there are about 280,000 individuals who were receiving a benefit or eligible to receive a benefit under the CARES Act. This is PEUC and PUA. So these folks they're not necessarily requesting a benefit payment on their claim. They could be, but they have benefit amounts remaining. So as of December 26th, they will not have access to those benefits. Now, let's say there's congressional action on the 24th. That bill still needs to be signed into law, and we still will need to await guidance from the U.S. Department of Labor. So there will likely be a period of time because Congress has waited to deliberate and come to an agreement on this where these folks do not have access to those benefit payments, but they will have access to those, if you will, for about another week. Again, we will be notifying these claimants when they are near expiration early next week, and we will also be notifying them when they can expect to receive the second round of stimulus benefits.
And I guess I could jump in a little bit on that one for you, Cher, too, Blair, just to try to make it clear for everybody, because that creates a whole bunch of other questions related to that. So the last payable week on those programs is the week ending December 26th. So if an individual has a balance, that's not going to matter. It will cut off on December 26th for the last payable week, which might lead to another question. Well, what happens if somebody doesn't file for that week ending December 26th until sometime later in January? They would still receive payment for that weekend that's ending December 26th. The other portion that Cher touches on, which is sort of an unknown at this point in time, is when congressional action occurs and is signed off, will that allow those individuals to reopen those claims, get the rest of that balance plus anything additional? That will need to await the guidance from U.S. Dole. However, quick review of the bill as it initially stood would seem to indicate the intent it would be to allow individuals who had still had a balance remaining to collect that and then collect the additional extra that they add to it.
Thank you, Phil. Okay. Tamara, would people who saw SCB end likely move to the additional PEUC if the new package passes? Ryan, do you want to talk about SCB? If we don't have the trigger to be triggered onto SCB and there's a mandatory 13-week waiting period, I'm assuming the answer would be no.
Right. So SCB is going to be a little different in terms of the IUR, insured unemployment rate dropped below 5% for the week ending the 7th, which initiated SCB triggering off on the week ending November 28th. Per federal statute or rules, SCB is triggered off for a mandatory 13-week period, regardless of whether or not that insured unemployment rate goes back above 5%. That essentially means that SCB wouldn't be able to trigger back on in Colorado until late February. In terms of it being 100% covered, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about how that's being covered in proposed legislation.
Tamara, I don't think I noted it in the proposal and in the documents we've received. So I don't believe it's included, but I'll check on that for you. Again, you would have to meet the trigger, and you would also have to have went through the 13-week mandatory off period. Anything else?
I guess to add to that, Tamara, is if U.S. Dole follows and is consistent on guidance that they provided for the first go around, the requirement was that individuals exhaust PEUC prior to being put on SEB, if that helps answer your question there too.
Charles, I am waiting for an answer to your question. I had to phone a friend to see what the answer to that question is. So I'll circle back with you before the end of the call. Tamara, did that answer your question? It does tend to get really complicated. You all do a remarkable job understanding the complexities of these various programs intersecting with each other.
Let me re-ask that.
Okay.
Because if PEUC or whatever the extended benefit gets an extra 16 weeks with the new proposed bill, could the people who got kicked off SEB conceivably move back to PEUC because they technically would get an extra 16 weeks?
Ryan,
Yeah,
go ahead, Phil. Go ahead.
Let me see if I can take that. To answer that, it would be yes, following most of the prior guidance. So if they also extended PUA and that individual is now on PUA, the rule for PUA is you can't be eligible for any state benefits. So those individuals would be required to come off of PUA if they had been on PUA at that point, go on to PEUC. Then in the future, if SEB triggers back on after they exhaust the PEUC is when they would be able to receive any SEB funds at that point in time, all the way up until April 19th, right? So the week ending April 17th would probably be the last payable week on any of those programs.
The acronyms drive us mad as well, Charles. Ryan, do you want to touch on Wayne's question? Then we'll go into the second part of your update.
Wayne, are you referring to when you say which likely will spike upward? Are you saying the December and January employment situations, or just trying to see exactly what you're referring to in terms of the December and January numbers?
I assume we'll see a higher unemployment rate, correct, in both of those months, given the big increases we've seen in initial claims? I mean, it doesn't translate directly, but
yeah, it's possible. I'll touch on that in my talking points for
okay.
Question, but yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So yes, with that, I guess that's a good segue to move into the data for the November employment situation. The data I will discuss today are based in part on estimates from two surveys. Statistics like the unemployment rate, labor force, total employment, and the number of unemployed are derived from the survey of households. This is otherwise known as the current population survey. Simply put, the household survey is meant to capture the employment and labor force status of individuals within Colorado over a given period. The household survey also includes the self-employed, independent contractors, farm workers, and those not attached to a traditional payroll employer. However, we are unable to break out those individuals at a state level. Non-farm payroll job estimates come from a survey of business establishments and government agencies, and these are intended to measure the number of jobs, not the number of people employed. These estimates exclude employees in agriculture, private households, and the self-employed. As we noted in today's press release, the reference period for the establishment and household surveys was the pay period of the week that includes the 12th of the month. Therefore, these data provide a snapshot of Colorado's employment situation around the time when the state was experiencing a steep rise in COVID-19 cases and additional business restrictions were implemented. However, the shift of 15 counties, Colorado counties, to the COVID-19 red dial occurred on November 20th, meaning the data we are reporting today may not fully capture the increase in layoffs and UI claims filings observed in the latter half of the month. This activity, again, what we're talking about is the increase in claims since essentially the week of the 20th to the current period of the week ending the 12th. This is most likely going to be reflected in December data, and most likely will probably pour into the January data as well, as you mentioned, Wayne. Revisions to November data, along with preliminary estimates for December, will be released Friday, January 22nd. Our release schedule for 2021 is now posted on our LMI Gateway website, so check that out if you'd like to plan ahead. Results from the household survey, Colorado's seasonally adjusted unemployment rate was unchanged in November, marking the third consecutive month the rate has held at 6.4%. Changes in both the labor force and total employment were minimal last month. In November, Colorado was tied with two other states for the 31st lowest unemployment rate in the nation. Nebraska and Vermont had the lowest rates at 3.1%, and New Jersey had the highest rate at 10.2%. The U.S. seasonally adjusted unemployment rate decreased from 6.9% in October to 6.7% in November. The difference between the U.S. and Colorado unemployment rate is now only 0.3 of a percentage point. As we mentioned in today's press release, the 5 counties with the highest not seasonally adjusted unemployment rates were San Miguel, Pitkin, Huerfano, Pueblo, and Eagle. Among the 7 metropolitan areas in the state, Pueblo had the highest rate at 8.3%. Boulder and Fort Collins had the lowest rates at 5.1% and 5.2% respectively. Grand Junction, Colorado Springs, Greeley, and Denver all had rates between 6 and 6.4%. It is recommended to compare all of the sub-state rates I mentioned to the statewide not seasonally adjusted unemployment rate, which was 6.2% in November. Shifting back to state data, the share of Coloradans unemployed more than 26 weeks approached 39% in November. That is similar to the ratio during the Great Recession, which exceeded 40%. The long-term unemployed share has increased significantly since September, when it was at 25%. Finally, the share of individuals in Colorado's labor force who are working part-time but would prefer full-time hours, that declined for the third straight month to a little under 5%. And that translates to approximately 150,000 individuals. In April, this figure covered an estimated 275,000 Coloradans. These types of individuals are characterized as involuntary part-time or underemployed workers. Additionally, in this definition, part-time is determined as anything less than 35 hours per week. For comparison, the involuntary part-time rate in 2019 was around 3%, or 100,000 individuals. So with that, I'm going to pause for a second. I think Wayne has a question. Pueblo's unemployment rate is increasing much faster than the rest of the Front Range. What is driving that increase? Yes, Wayne, that is correct. If you look at the weekly claims data as well, Pueblo has had relatively higher higher claims levels than other counties as well. I'll have to look in terms of what industries are necessarily being impacted. Pueblo does tend to have a higher unemployment rate than than the other metro areas, and that is, I think, being illustrated here as well during this recession. But again, primarily it will be a mixture of industry composition and demographics. Will also be kind of indicators in terms of and claims activity, of course, what determines the area's unemployment rate. Greg, can you share where we can find underemployment data? Greg, a lot of this is internal data I'm sharing, so won't necessarily be something I could share that's monthly approximate, but we do have an LMI gateway. If you want to contact me later, we do have some data on LMI gateway you can reference. But for those who have more detailed knowledge on unemployment rates, the involuntary part-time rate is also a factor of the U6 unemployment rate, which is the most expansive definition of unemployment. And that's also available on BLS's site too. Shifting to the establishment survey, the preliminary estimates show that on a seasonally adjusted basis, Colorado non-farm payroll jobs declined by 6,900 from October to November. This represents the first time since April that payroll jobs had been lost on an over-the-month basis. 16 other states also experienced a decline in payroll jobs last month. Additionally, October payroll figures were revised down very slightly by 500 jobs. So the numbers for October and November mean the state has regained 209,600 of the 342,300 non-farm payroll jobs lost in March and April. Those total gains of 209,600 over the past 7 months represent a recovery of about 61% of those jobs lost earlier in the year, which ranks as the 20th fastest rate of recovery in the nation over that period. A similar analysis of the change in U.S. non-farm payroll jobs since April revealed the U.S. added back close to 56% of lost jobs. While government employment dropped by 1,000 in November, like last month, those losses are primarily due to the end of the 2020 census campaign and related temporary jobs. The private sector experienced a reversal of 6 months of strong gains, shedding 5,900 payroll jobs in November. Leisure and hospitality was the private industry sector with the greatest job loss last month, with a drop of 6,400. That was driven by a reduced start to the ski season and winter tourism in the high country, as well as employment changes within the restaurant industry. And that will be basically across the state for restaurants. Healthcare and social assistance service jobs declined by 4,100, while financial activities decreased by 2,000. On the other side, two industries, administrative support service and transportation and warehousing, both gained at least 3,000 jobs each last month. That is most likely due to an increase in the hiring of temporary workers, as well as warehouse and delivery workers as online holiday shopping accelerates. Over the past 7 months, private businesses have added 233,400 jobs, and that's compared to losses totaling 332,200 in March and April. That represents a recovery of about 70% of private sector jobs lost earlier in the year, which substantially outpaces the US rate of around 60%. Colorado's private sector recovery rate ranks as the 13th fastest in the nation when expressed as a rate, and 18th highest in absolute terms, meaning we added back an absolute number of 233,400 jobs since April. So despite the private sector losses last month, Colorado's recovery is still relatively strong compared to the rest of the U.S. And then finally, I will just quickly cover jobs added by the metro area. As always, we do not break out non-farm payroll jobs by county. These data are seasonally adjusted and directly comparable to the state number that we released today. Denver added 1,400 jobs. Greeley added 1,200 jobs. Colorado Springs with a gain of 1,100. And Pueblo with a small gain of 200. Fort Collins, Boulder, and Grand Junction all had over the month losses. Grand Junction dropped by 400, Boulder 500 payroll jobs, and Fort Collins 900. And so what this shows us is we have, if you look at the metro areas, it seems relatively positive. And so that means really it's the balance of state that shouldered a lot of those job losses in November. And that's really going to tie into that tourism season, the high country, and really a disruption to our normal kind of ski season, start of the ski season, and tourist activities that occur when there's not a pandemic. So, I think we'll see a shift back towards the metro areas losing jobs next month. That's very for December. Sorry, that's very possible. But it does appear that for November is really those non-metro areas that were explained a lot of those job losses. So with that, I could take questions. Hold on just a second. So is your sense employers and Legion Hospitality started laying off ahead of level red restrictions? What is recovery rate in Legion Hospitality? So one question's gonna have to wait because I have to sign back into my computer. It likes to log me out. I'll have that recovery rate soon. The other question in terms of, Legion Hospitality layoffs, if you look at the data that we make publicly available, we do start seeing upticks in initial claims, like overall initial claims for the week of, let me think about this. Would it be the week of the 12th? Apologies. So I get my dates right here. Right. Okay. So if we look at regular UI initial claims for the week ending November 14th, we see a significant increase in claims as they jump from 7,500 to 9,200. So that does show me that there was some layoff activity earlier in the month. However, I do think that's more tied to weather and the inability to logistically seat people outside or seat them outside comfortably rather than in anticipation of COVID-19 restrictions. Now, for the week ending the 21st, those initial claims filed increased from 9,000 the prior week to 15,000. And we've seen steady increases since then. And I think those increases are more tied to the COVID-19 restrictions than anything. So I hope that answers your question, Aldo. From Haley, a lot of things are coming to a head at this point of the pandemic. It's the holiday season. People are about to lose benefits next week. COVID cases counts are up and high restrictions are in place. Many people worried about evictions in January. I think people experiencing all of this at once are looking for something tangible to blame. And I hear people pointing their fingers and frustrations at CDLE. Describe how the agency's hands are tied in many ways. Cher, I was thinking that might have been an economic question. I'm going to kick that over to you and let me know if you need to.
Thanks for repeating it for everyone, Ryan. Could you quickly, before I respond, talk maybe a quick comparison about where we are with this recession versus the Great Recession and contrast the two, just to remind folks that not only did we have longer to prepare for the depths of the Great Recession, whereas this pandemic hit our program within a 3-week period, but just compare the claims volume and the benefit payout amounts, and then Haley, I'll get to your question.
Yes, just like Cher mentioned, this being a health crisis, the impact was immediate. The shock to the economy was immediate. The Great Recession, while it was the most severe recession we had seen since the Great Depression, our initial claims peak for 1 week was about 7,800 claims. We earlier this year, we had a single week with over 100,000 initial claims. And we've also had the added PUA program, which has been, like I mentioned, we've almost paid out $1 billion to PUA claimants. Again, that's a population of claimants that didn't exist in the Great Recession. We've paid out over $6.5 billion in total unemployment benefits so far this year, which is a staggering amount. If you look at 2009, we paid out 1.7 billion in all programs, 2.2 billion in 2010, 1.8 billion in 2011. So the volume is something that I don't think we ever could have fathomed. And honestly, I've been very impressed with the department's response in paying people and responding to what is a crisis we haven't seen in our lifetime.
Thanks, Ryan. I would just add, to punctuate Ryan's point, March 9th, we had 400 initial claims. 2 weeks later, we had 24,000. This isn't a 3-week period. Operating at a 6,000% workload would be a challenge for any public or private entity. That said, we have successfully stood up a number of additional federally funded programs quicker than almost the majority of states. We continue to pay 80% of initial claims filed. We're meeting or exceeding the federal timely payment requirements. All that is to say, we know some people either need to speak to a person or need that assurance from a person that their claim is on track. Our virtual agent, after implementing that tool, we're closing in on about 148,000 callbacks to people who are requesting a callback with questions on their claim. We continue to theme the reasons for a callback. Again, many of these don't require interaction with an agent, such as report fraud, request a PIN, reopen a claim. All of these things can be done online through our self-service options. Certainly, this is our first pandemic too, and we've been attempting to adjust processes, add staff, look at process improvements as we go, but certainly we have work ahead. And so we feel for those claimants who are frustrated now, especially with benefits ending. Again, these are federal programs. The state has no ability, no funding, and no authority to extend these programs. And certainly when and if they are extended, we will work as quickly as we can to implement the requirements to quickly get benefits to people who need them. What are some state options for people losing benefits? It's actually a really good question. A number of things. So in our outreach to claimants who are losing these benefits, a couple of things. You may have noticed in the Thursday press releases now, we are adding links to some job openings in the state's jobs database. There are actually over 75,000 jobs in connectingcolorado.com. So one of the things we're trying to do is encourage folks to visit their local workforce center. There's a network of state and county run workforce centers throughout the state. These can help job seekers with resume updating and a lot of workshops that are offered. These are free to job seekers. And they also have access to job counselors who can connect them with training or reemployment opportunities. So one would be certainly look at the state's jobs database. The second thing, and that's from the state perspective with regard to the Department of Labor, certainly we are also pointing folks to other programs, housing assistance, other locally provided human services support assistance. We know these are difficult times going into the holidays. The Department of Labor administers just one benefit program. There's certainly other state agencies that have access to other benefit programs. So our goal is to make sure we're connecting impacted claimants with those other services available. As a matter of fact, we are partnering with some of our other state agencies, Human Services and Corrections, who also have a number of employment opportunities available. So we're hoping to connect people with jobs in this difficult environment, but also other state resources that are available. What else?
I think Ed had a question on the financial industry, so I'll just take that real quick.
Okay.
Ed, financial activities are split into two subsectors. That's going to be finance and insurance, and real estate, rental, and leasing. Finance and insurance actually increased by 600 over the month. Finance insurance will include primarily banks and then insurance companies. Real estate rental and leasing is a long title, but really that's going to be primarily real estate workers that are real estate workers, as well as a leasing and rentals. And so car rentals are going to be a big part of that. So I think part of it is perhaps a drop in the demand for car rentals as we move into the winter season, as people aren't traveling as much. Then we're also seeing an impact in real estate. I haven't dug too much into it, and I certainly can do that. It's possible that this data could be revised one way or another, but that's where it's coming from, is that real estate rental and leasing component.
Other questions? Every time I get ready to close out, we get questions. So I'm going to just filibuster just for a couple of minutes on a few other updates I forgot to mention. One is around fraud. As we've reported early on, the PUA program unfortunately lends itself to a higher degree of fraud than regular unemployment. We've implemented a number of things to prevent and detect fraud. We continue to hear from individuals who may receive a Relia card, a prepaid debit card, because unfortunately they were a victim of fraud, not because of our system, but because their identity has been stolen at some point in time. Again, just a friendly reminder, if you suspect that somebody is using your identity to file for unemployment, our recommendation is to go to coloradoui.gov. Click on the report fraud link and complete that form. It logs it into our system. If you receive a debit card, immediately call US Bank, deactivate the card, and then follow the steps we've outlined on our website. Back to what Phil was mentioning about our modernization efforts, we will be conducting a series of town halls for claimants. We did these early on in the pandemic. I think at our peak, we had about 25,000 participants. In one of our town halls, we'll be offering these up again. Again, we'll have extended call center hours. We'll be adding significant staff to our call centers to answer claimant questions. The biggest change that regular UI claimants will face, again, instead of requesting a benefit payment every other week, it will be every week. And again, they will be interfacing with a brand new application. So we'll continue to be contacting these folks, preparing them for this change, letting you know where we are with the change. And to that point, I would mark your calendars for probably we'll be doing a press call the week of the 4th, likely Thursday the 7th. And certainly we'll send out an advisory once we have those details firmed up. Fraudsters targeting retired workers. It's a good question, Aldo. I think that unfortunately, criminals in all areas, including identity theft, filing fraudulent tax returns, filing fraudulent UI claims, prey on the most vulnerable, which are the older populations, including those that are retired. And again, PUA, because of how the program is written by the feds, unfortunately just lends itself to a greater degree of fraud. And so it really is pervasive across all populations. And so the best thing that an individual can do is, if they suspect this, report it to us. Also report it to the credit reporting agencies and flag your credit report with a fraud alert. That can protect you from instances of fraud into the future. And again, just to reemphasize, you are just seeing an incredible amount of fraud in all systems of state and federal benefits. Stolen identities, maybe you didn't know your identity was stolen. Fortunately, criminals seize this opportunity, unfortunately, again, on those that are very vulnerable. So I don't know that we see a higher degree with retirees, Aldo, but certainly that is a population that we are seeing some predatory activity around.
And I think, Sheriff, if I jumped in a little on that, I believe we were making some adjustments to the online form for claimants who report fraud. We are aware that employers, their addresses have also been used for fraud. So we're trying to open that up so that those employers can also report that to us immediately when they receive items for parties, whether they be RELIA cards or information related to claims, in order to try to hit that fraud and stop that fraud too.
Thanks, Phil. And I did mention in the chat in responding to a question from Charles is that I do understand in the new stimulus package, there will be additional documentation requirements for PUA claims. Again, all of this needs to come to us through the U.S. Department of Labor, so I don't know the details of those documentation requirements yet, but we certainly do hope that they realize that this program has some issues that require additional documentation to help us address the rampant fraud. Okay. Well, with that, be safe. I hope everybody has a great holiday season. We'll be in touch with you after the first of the year, if not before. Good to see everybody. Take care, and we'll talk to you soon.